Our guest today is the president of the Illinois Federation of Teachers. He has served as president for just over 3 years. The Illinois Federation of Teachers has 103,000 members. Our guest today taught English for 18 years at Niles North High School. He also taught in the city colleges of Chicago, at Northwestern University, and at Francis Parker School. Our guest today and his wife, Patty, are the proud parents of 3 children and live in Evanston, Illinois. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Montgomery. Dan?
Thanks very much. Thank you, Jay. Thanks very much, and thank you, Paul, and good afternoon. Let's put my water down here. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. For 18 years, I taught school at Niles North in Skokie, and I could never come to the City Club because I was always teaching. But since I've been president the last 3 years, I've managed to come to a few of these, and it's a great institution, I think a venerable institution and an important one in the public life of our city. And talking in front of Paul Green, I'm struck by the odd impulse to declare my candidacy for the county board, as some people do apparently in your classroom. No, I will not do that. I do want to take a moment and express our concern and our thoughts, as everyone has, I'm sure, for those folks affected by the tornadoes yesterday. We have about, as far as we can tell, the IFT has about 750 members in a number of the communities affected by the tornadoes. We've got about 165 in Washington. Many of those are Peoria teachers who live in Washington. And we're have word out to our staff there to today they're really sort of assessing the damage and trying to understand what sort of help they need. I see my brother Sean Smoot from the Police Benevolence Association, Pat Devaney's here from the Illinois Firefighters, and we were talking, and they're all working hard. So hopefully over the course of the day we'll have a better sense of what we all can do to help them, and appreciate that. I know we'll have something on our website later. I do want to thank, again, Tweed Thornton, the person, the director, I guess is his title, also for helping us today. And my wife, Patty, who's here. Patty, mother of our 3 children. She has a birthday coming up. Jay said the reason we had a much nicer dessert today was because of Patty. So, well, I'm sure that's true. And there are a number of IFT officers, vice presidents, and other affiliated folks here. Marcia Campbell, the secretary-treasurer of the IFT from O'Fallon, is there. I know there are a number of IFT vice presidents, if you could wave, and also our brothers and sisters from the CTU are here as well. Jesse Sharkey, vice president, Christine Maley, the secretary-treasurer. Well, I want to talk about the public schools and public schools in this city and in our state, and the importance that we all have for defending that great institution of public education in America. Before I do that, let me give you a little context about the IFT and myself. As Jay said, we have 103,000 members statewide. We've been around for about 77 years. We've got pre-K-12 teachers, support staff people who are custodians, bus drivers, work in the lunchrooms, our teachers' aides, paraprofessionals. We also have higher education faculty and staff in community colleges and four-year universities, and we represent a few thousand public employees. The Chicago Teachers Union, Local 1 in the AFT, is our largest affiliate, and we now represent 1,200 tenured and non-tenured track faculty at the University of Illinois in Chicago, and they're bargaining their first contract as we speak. We represent about almost 500 charter teachers in the newly organized UNO charter network in the city, and they also are bargaining their first contract. And our public employees, they're pretty much everywhere you go where you might encounter public employees. If you're in the Thompson Center, for instance, the Secretary of State's security police there are represented by the IFT. They keep people safe there. We have meat inspectors, seed inspectors, very important people in an agricultural state like Illinois. And a growing part of our membership is graduate assistants at universities, GEOs at UIC, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and other places. I was just down last week in Champaign where they were doing a protest with students, the GEOs and students, about student debt. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that issue later. I'm a teacher. I started my career here in the city, working at the city colleges, first out of Truman College, teaching ESL to adults, which was an amazing experience. It was a transformative experience in my life, and oftentimes I would say almost a spiritually changing experience. I would teach people who really spoke no English at all, sometimes in church basements or community centers around the school, around the city, and really caught the teaching bug there. Went back, my bachelor's was from the University of Michigan in English. I went and got a master's in teaching at Northwestern and got hired at Niles North in Skokie, where I've been doing this job for about 17 or 18 years before I was elected to be president of the IFT in 2010. Are there any Niles Township graduates in this room? I'm just curious. Is there one? There we go. Yeah, there's one at least, a couple. They're everywhere. I run into them everywhere. And, you know, I actually brag about the Niles schools any chance I get, and there's a few reasons for that. One, it's a fantastic district, but it's a model of what public education can and should be around the country. The district has an incredibly diverse student population, you know, something like 70 languages spoken by the students there. The families who attend those schools run the economic spectrum from extremely poor to very wealthy. There's a strong base of retail and light industry in that township, and it has a community that supports schools and values education and is willing to pay for it. Before Niles East closed, they produced 2 Nobel laureates in science. One of them was quoted in the Chicago Tribune not long ago as saying, and the quote was, "We had spectacular teachers." There's still great teachers there. A couple more recent graduates. David Walton graduated in '94, shortly after I got to Niles North. Went to Augustana College, and then he went to Harvard Medical School. He's now a professor at Women and Brigham's Hospital, and was one of the founders of a group called Partners in Health. He went down to Haiti many years ago, actually I think when he was in medical school, led a team that transformed a public clinic in Haiti's Central Plateau into a fully functioning center for primary care, women's health, and chronic disease management. And then he spearheaded a small team that designed and built a community hospital in a catchment area that serves about 60,000 people, and he's currently working on construction of a national teaching hospital there. With Partners in Health and his work there, he's really emerged as a leading international expert in community-based care of HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, in resource-poor settings, and he's involved in treating the cholera outbreak there. Or I think of Mike Kim. Mike Kim, another North graduate. He's an author, consultant, NGO founder, and a North Korea specialist. He now lives in Washington. He's the author of the Wall Street Journal book, Escaping North Korea, which is sort of his memoir about his experiences. I think it was right after Christmas in 2003, he gave up his successful financial planning business he had here in the city, and he took a one-way ticket to China, where he got involved with the hundreds of thousands of North Koreans fleeing through China, a 6,000-mile modern-day underground railroad where some of them end up in Thailand, actually. But these are people who are leaving a tyranny, a despotic regime, for a better life. And he founded a group called Crossing Borders, a nonprofit dedicated to providing humanitarian assistance to North Korean refugees. And his story is actually now being turned into a major motion picture. Ran into a former student. I was on a panel a couple weeks ago at the University of Chicago, David Axelrod's Institute for Politics. We were talking about the Common Core, and lo and behold, there in the audience was my former student, Katie Rossman. Katie went to Stanford, is working now at that institute as coordinating their fellows program. When I was in UIC last week also, was both in Champaign and up here, but at UIC, the professors who are negotiating their first contract had a rally. I spoke there, and there was my former student, Farzana Chavda, in the audience. I had her as a freshman. She was in a special reading program, reading years behind her grade level. She completed her bachelor's in women's studies and psychology, is in the second year of her master's in social work at UIC, and wants to go into community organizing. So a doctor who's Nobel laureates, a doctor who's an international expert in public health, successful businessman turned NGO founder, a Stanford grad, a blossoming social worker. Do these folks sound to you like the product of a broken educational system? Would anyone really believe that their successes are anomalies and that only, say, charter schools can produce success stories? Well, these kinds of successes occur all over the city, in Chicago, the suburbs, and the state of Illinois. And I'm just going to ask a question, kind of a teacher thing. Raise your hand if you think that your education was instrumental in your success in life. Raise your hand. All right. Keep your hand up if you had public schooling at some point in your education. Well, you guys, except for some of you, and your appearances seem to turn out okay. It's a safe bet that virtually most, if not nearly all, of the educators you had in your public schooling were union members too. And they're one and the same. So why is it that so many people believe this common narrative that our schools are broken? I mean, I keep thinking of the Time magazine cover of a few years ago, Michelle Rhee on the cover. Can she fix America's schools? Because they must be broken, right? Well, you know, our school system is a reflection of our society at large, and we all need to apply the critical eyes, the critical thinking that we learn in school on the claims that we hear about education. You know, Karen Lewis talks about it when she was here. I heard her, you know, she'll say, we need to make data-based decisions, right? And she's right about that. And I think that's what she's going after. And we have to even go further than that. It goes to thoughtful, engaged critical thinking about the politics and the issues in front of us in the public square. So allow me to let you in on something. In a couple of weeks, you're going to hear, surely, more hue and cry about how broken America's schools are. I'm sure everyone here has heard of the World Bank and the IMF. I wonder how many people have actually heard of the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's arguably more important than either of those other two institutions. The United States has an embassy devoted purely to the OECD. Well, it's going to release its new PISA results December 3rd. The OECD is an organization, 34 countries around the world dedicated to global economic development. They study issues, education and other issues, and they make recommendations for common problems with the intent and hope that nations will follow these recommendations. And they administer PISA tests, which stands for the Program for International Student Assessment. It's really the best international benchmark we have of learning. And they measure capability in reading, math, science. The 2012 test focused on math, and we're going to soon hear the results of that. It's given to 15-year-olds selected randomly over 70 countries. They survey principals, parents, other stakeholders, but not teachers. And the U.S. sample is based on about 165 schools and 4,200 students. And, you know, I'm going to predict the headlines and the blog posts and the tweets that we're going to see from the reform community that this time that the results might be even worse. I think we can expect, from what we understand and what we're hearing, that the results are going to be about the same as they were last time, which would put the U.S. about 25th internationally in many measures. Our point of view would be, if you're not really changing what you're doing, are you really going to expect to get any different results? You know, we know that our 15-year-olds are not where we want them to be, but I think we have to use a more critical eye than the top-line headlines. We have to turn the page a little deeper into the report to see what's there. So let's think about that. The United States has the highest poverty rate among the developed nations that participate in PISA. It's a factor that has a significant impact on performance. So when you apply poverty factors, the United States schools in the research, the U.S. schools come out on top in every social economic scale. So if you look at U.S. schools with 30% poverty and you compare them to the international schools with 30% poverty, our scores are at the top. And you can do this right down the line. That's an astounding figure, an astounding fact. And this idea that the United States has more poverty than any of the other developed countries that participate in PISA, it's outrageous. The biggest issue maybe beyond that gets lost in the reporting in the PISA rankings is this question of equity in the resources that we do have and support for education across the U.S. And the funding disparities that we have from district to district or school to school, we rank at the bottom in equity in international comparisons. And Illinois ranks at the bottom in equity in the United States. So we're the worst of the worst in terms of the equitable distribution of our resources for schooling. We also see that since 2008, since the global economic crisis, the average OECD countries increased spending on education by 5%. The United States, we decreased by 1%. Now, I was in Singapore about a year and a half ago, which is a top-performing PISA country. Really, a rampantly running economy. It's an amazing place to see. They've been growing their economy for years. But in 2008, like the rest of the world, they went down in their GDP and other economic measures. And they said to me, they said, what is going on in the United States? We were meeting with the Ministry of Education. They said, what is this austerity talk? Your economy, it's going down. You have to invest more. That's what we did in Singapore. And a year later, their economy turned around and they had growth again. The rest of the world understands that the way to get out of economic doldrums is not austerity. So these other OECD comparisons usually point out that spending in the United States is the highest in the world. But they seldom take note of the fact that spending in the U.S. is high because of university and college costs. That's what pushes our expenditures higher. K-12, the U.S. is on average with OECD countries. It's the cost of higher education, $25,000 a year in the United States, which is pushing us up there. And by the way, I want to mention one other sort of relevant thing, especially in this city. Another part of the popular school reform movement platform, I think, that's called into question by PISA is the push for a longer academic year and more hours in a school day. That's obviously a flashpoint in the mayor's education reform agenda, has been. Well, the fact is that the United States already has the longest school day of any of the countries in PISA, and as well as a longer day for students than all the other higher performing nations. And if you look at the grid, the teachers are paid at the bottom. So our teachers work more hours and get paid less than all the other countries on average. So while it's true that many of the high-ranking countries, their teachers have longer school days, the extra hours are for teachers, not students. So for example, the Japanese do what they call lesson study, where teachers will work together. It's almost like a medical model where teachers go over the same lessons together and perfect their teaching. But that takes time. Teachers in Japan have less class time than their U.S. Peers, but they use more hours each day for collaboration and preparation and lesson planning. So what will the story say when PISA is released? Well, I don't really have to tell you in much more detail. They say our students are getting worse and our teachers are failing them. Neither is true. The headline should read that we need to work together to do what we call in our union and the AFT calls reclaiming the promise of public education. So the question then becomes, how do we do that? Well, a couple more things from the OECD before I move on to some points that I'd like to share with you for a way to go forward. The OECD says that if a country wants better academic achievement, then it's incumbent on the political and social leaders to persuade their citizens that choices need to be made that value education more than other areas of national interest. In our vision, we think in our union as professionals that we represent a commitment to high-quality education for all children, that it's a moral imperative, that public schools are a fundamental civil right. What doesn't the OECD prescribe? It doesn't prescribe austerity. They don't prescribe attacking public institutions. They don't think that government or unions as public structures are dirty words. It makes for snappy talk on cable news programs, but it doesn't hold up to the facts. Governments matter, government matters, so do unions. We're not perfect, but to ignore what you personally know, what you all know about public schools and teachers and skip right to the convenient 140-character tweets that says unions are the problems or teachers are the problems, they're insincere at best and very destructive. Public schools and vibrant, invested in, well-resourced public schools need to remain here. They need to provide quality education for every child, no matter the conditions into which those children are born or their geography. And the quality of our education, as we often say, ought not be based on your zip code, which is very much the situation we have in Illinois. It's the same reason we need common high standards for children around the state and around the country. Let me share one more observation from someone else about this issue. This person said, critics of American education often are very disapproving of teachers' unions, and they perceive unions, I think, because they believe that we're out there sort of, feathering our own nest, that we're promising, what we do is interfere with promising school reforms, because our real issue is the bread and butter issues of our own members, their economic well-being, and not the institutions or the children we teach or serve. But the fact is that many of the countries with the strongest student performance also have the strongest teachers' unions, beginning with Japan and Finland. Indeed, the higher a country is on the World's Education League tables, the more likely it is that that country is working constructively with its unions and treating its teachers as trusted professional partners. Canada, Ontario, our neighbors, very similar Ontario is to Illinois in many demographic respects. They had a very acidic relationship, toxic relationship with the conservative government there. A less conservative government took over, and McGuinty, the prime minister, the premier there in Ontario, said, we're going to work with our teachers' unions. So they worked very, very closely together on a number of issues, and they saw results change. Students did better as a result. Well, who said that quote about unions? Was it me, Karen Lewis, Al Shanker? No, it was PISA in their report, Lessons for the United States, in 2010. In 2010, that message, that book was delivered. The first printed copy was hand-delivered to Arne Duncan, the Secretary of Education. And we're still waiting for some of those things to happen. On the equity issue, no other developed nation has inequities nearly as deep or systemic. No other developed nation has, despite some efforts to the contrary, so thoroughly stacked the odds against so many of its children. And sadly, what feels so very un-American turns out to be essentially American. And in the end, the OECD recommends 5 things for better educational outcomes: more equitable school finance, high-quality teachers, principal, and curricula, expanding early childhood education, mitigating the effects of poverty, and accountability and governance reforms. So the question is, can we move towards those recommendations in Illinois? I believe we can. And to move toward a state that will help all children in Chicago and in Gurnee and Granite City, I would propose that we concentrate on the following 4 concerns. First, a fair economy. We need a fairer economy coordinated with a fairer tax system in Illinois. We still have too few jobs here. All the best school reforms in the world, I often say we can get all the best reforms in place in schools that we could possibly think of, and none of that will have an effect on a child as strong and as lasting in that child's life as if their parent loses a job or gets a job, or God forbid, both their parents lose jobs. Those outcomes, those economic outcomes, are much more pervasive in the student's life than almost anything we can do in a school. We have too few jobs here. The IFT supports a Better Illinois campaign for fair taxation because we can have more revenue to address our key needs in education and social service, and we can keep taxes the same or lower them for most citizens, and we can ask the very wealthy to pay more. We believe in this. A vast majority of Illinoisans believe in it. The second thing we would do is have a truly universal, high-quality pre-K early childhood education. We made some excellent strides here in Illinois recently, but we can do better. Studies continue to show that the returns for investment of dollars in early childhood are very strong, on average something like $5 returned for every $1 invested. If you look at Red State, Oklahoma, a very interesting place to look, Red State, Republican-controlled, they have model pre-K programs, universal, special programs for kids who are really behind in some things in pre-K. They don't handle this like a politically right issue or a politically left issue. They've looked at the facts. They realize it's an important thing for the quality of the life of their citizens and their state. We can do that here. The third issue would be revamping pre-K to 12 school funding in Illinois. Senator Andy Menard from Champaign has been talking about this, as have a lot of us. We have to address the massive inadequacy and inequity that we have in our system. the over-reliance on property tax, which gives birth to that. It is possible to change it. We have to do it in a coordinated, holistic way. We can't have Band-Aid upon Band-Aid upon Band-Aid. That's really given us a very arcane system that we have in school funding. And I believe there's political will to do that, and we all have to lead on that. And the last thing I want to talk about is a debt-free higher education access. And I propose here today that Illinois creates a higher education funding mechanism that would allow for any Illinois high school grad with good grades to attend an Illinois public college or university and graduate without debt. Without debt. In the OECD countries, we see that those countries with high rates of college access, high levels of bachelor's degrees, they have on average 5% unemployment. Illinois, last I heard, I think is still hovering around 9%. This is an economic imperative. It's been done in other states, Georgia, Tennessee, Florida. California has it in some ways. They've managed to do it. The IFT is going to work towards such legislation, and I hope everybody in this room would see it, again, not a right or left issue, but an economic imperative. So, a fairer economy with fair taxation, universal pre-K, adequate and equitable K-12 funding, and debt-free access to higher education. Imagine what Chicago would look like, what Illinois would look like, and how we could function under those conditions. We're the 17th largest economy in the world, as the governor likes to say. We ought to be able to find a way to do it. So let me conclude with a tiny bit of history and a request for help from everybody in this room. One of my heroes is the late Albert Shanker, who was in fact a University of Illinois alum, and the former president of the AFT. He had been president of the New York City Public Teachers Union. He was a true public intellectual, but also seen by many as a very militant labor leader. If you want to know more about him, I recommend reading Richard Kahlenberg's excellent biography of him called Tough Liberal. Interestingly, Shanker was very close to the business community. The CEOs of IBM, Xerox, they loved him. They loved him. He had many strong relationships with the business community. Why? They liked his emphasis on high standards and really a truly professional, helping to make teaching the profession it needs to be. Where are the major business leaders today who praise unions? Who praise unions, let alone their leaders? Today, sadly, you're more apt to hear about business leaders wanting to end unions. That's a problem. Ask yourself, am I a union boss, as some who would like to lead this state have called me publicly, just a union thug? I'm a public school teacher. I lead other public school teachers and educators who work in people who work in education. We lead them for better schools, for better communities, and a better state. We need community groups, we need parents, but we also need the business community to rethink this narrative. You all need, and your friends and your colleagues and the people you know, all need to fight just as hard for public schools and great public schools in every neighborhood, as hard as the teacher unions are fighting. Please join us. A vibrant American democracy depends on it. Thank you.
If there are any, since it's a pretty well-stacked crowd, are there any questions? By the way, I've been to the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Now I have the Learning Power of Pisa. This is good stuff. I'll leave the Albert Shanker thing alone, but go rent Woody Allen's movie Sleeper.
He is mentioned in that film.
He got a hold of the bomb, and that's how the world became extinct. Okay. Tom Leahy, where are you, Tom? You used 2 sheets, by the way, Tom. This is austerity. Is it possible to teach a teacher how to inspire his or her students?
That's a great question. I think it is. I think, there's certainly often a natural gift that some people just have for teaching. I've witnessed it many times, a new teacher who you just, wows everybody out of the gate. But I think there's a lot of things that go into how you can inspire people, right? A natural love for what you do, and a deep knowledge about what it is you're teaching. And so you can help people gain deep knowledge about their subject matter. We do have to raise the bar. The AFT, our union, the IFT, in fact, we had one of our IFT members from higher ed on a group at the AFT that came out with calls for raising the standards for admission into the profession and having a system not unlike the bar system for lawyers. And it's not just about one, paper pencil exam. It's about a much longer internship period. I had to student teach for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. I mean, anyone who's ever taught will tell you that's deeply insufficient. And those who go through it and do well as teachers get beyond that, and you learn on the job a lot. But so we can do a number of things that I think help prepare teachers better, and I think builds into their capacity to inspire.
This is a really easy question, but, you got to give them a cupcake every now and then, right? Juan Sagaudo, is that how you pronounce it? Close enough. You ready for this one? You could have 10 seconds to think of your answer. What advice do you have for the CTU and Mayor Emanuel to bring trust required to really achieve excellence for our kids and families? Make sure that thing is going, the recording of this.
So I get to give advice to Rahm Emanuel and Karen Lewis. Okay. Well, I mean, the question is really about building trust. And, I don't think that the way that, say, the CTU and the mayor would have to build trust would be any different than the way anyone else would have to build trust, I know, working very closely with CTU, they've worked very hard to try to find places to work together with, the public schools management. The mayor's a little bit separate from that. I mean, he's politically doing something else sometimes than the people who are running the schools every day. And, you hear in the media the red meat about all the catastrophe and doom and fighting and this word and that word. But the fact of the matter is they've got 28,000 teachers and support staff and folks every day working in schools along with administrators, with management in the schools, doing good things. And so I don't think we can get too distracted by some of those things that make the cover of the paper. And hopefully, those little things they do every day help to build trust on the big items. So that's my advice.
Okay, we have time for one last question. No name, huh? Trombone, all right. Okay. Be careful. Not even on an official entry. See, as a teacher, this kid would go to the back of the room right off the bat. 2 strikes again. Doesn't sign his name. The wrong form. All right, here we go.
See if it's a good question.
That may be your saving grace. Your debt-free Illinois college plan, does this include community college and vocational school? Yes or no?
I would say yes, and that is a good question. I think,
Only part A. But keep going.
sure, okay. Well, and I'll go back to Niles for an example. I think still, or at this point, the majority of students who go to higher ed of our high schools are going to Oakton and some community college. So that is a huge part of it. Typically, there's less debt there than you would have to, but you could argue that should make it easier to do. But I see no reason not to include it.
Part B. Do you believe this should be debt forgiveness tied to work, debt forgiveness without restrictions, or some other method? How would you structure it?
Yeah. Well, so there's already people talking about things like paying it forward, essentially that we're uncomfortable with, in the sense that the point is you don't want to saddle someone with a mortgage that is going to be a burden on them the rest of their lives as they try to establish themselves as a professional, people who want to marry, possibly have children, have a house, all the things we expect out of a middle-class life, and then they start really far behind and under the gun with massive amounts of student debt. So I think you have to be very careful about how to structure it. We want to talk, there are a lot of people thinking about this idea. In some of the states where they do it, I mean, they have a dedicated funding stream. If you ask people, some of the polling, should there be free tuition? People don't like that idea. That's like, we don't like free handouts, right? But if you ask questions that say, how about something that would result in essentially the same thing, that they love. So I think there's a way to do it that isn't just quote unquote free tuition, but there's going to have to be funding for it. And the ultimate goal is they come out without the burden of a massive payment that's going to take them the next 20 years to pay off or longer.
How about a nice round of applause for, you got
Thank you
party
very much.
gifts, party gifts.
Thanks so much, Paul.